Gaming Blues Podcast, Esports Edition.
Back after a long ass time, this is another episode of the Gaming Blues Podcast, kind of Esports Edition. We'll see how it goes. Alright, it's been a long time, roughly about a couple of months. I've been off, mostly busy with conference work, but since the conference have kind of slowed down a bit, and the whole the coronavirus outbreak hitting the entire world right now, I've been set to work from home, so I have more time to actually make content. And this episode is about just that, making content right now for esports. Before that, this podcast is available on many podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Podbean, and probably any other podcast platform you can think of. Mash that follow button, leave me feedback, and look forward to, well, you know what, I'm not going to promise anything. You will get updates to new episodes when you get them. At this point in time, I have failed to actually properly coordinate when I should record content and release them, so I will try my best to basically record whenever I get an idea for a podcast or an episode and just launch it ASAP. Because I find at this point, while quality is over quantity, I'm still need to get my name out there. So I think doing both, releasing quality content but at a large quantity, will be good for me. So follow me and you will basically get updates whenever I make content. Alright, today's episode is all about the current working conditions in terms of what everyone's doing in esports right now. So because of the coronavirus, every single, or I would say most major and minor sporting events has been canceled and or moved to playing without an audience. And this also affected esports scene as well, where initially it started in the LPL and LCK of League of Legends, where they took a couple of weeks, even months of a hiatus in order to protect the health of the players and the fans and the casters and all the staff, by basically ordering them to stay home and not go outside in order to contain the virus. This also spread out through the North American region and Europe and everywhere else in the world. And we have witnessed the shutdown of the Overwatch League, the Call of Duty League, the NALCS, EULCS. I'm pretty sure any other Europe, like the Oceania leagues, even the Japanese leagues have all shut down because of the virus. We are slowly getting back to, going back on the playing schedule again, but again, with the virus not fully contained or not even getting close to being contained, we are moving to a system where, similar to real sports, where they will play in offline stadiums or online. I think I'm wrong about the playing offline without an audience. I think we're past that point. So every game, at least for the LCK, starting on the 26th, as I am reading this tweet right now, will be held online. The shutdown of the leagues brought a big problem for freelancer content creators out there, who some of them I met them in real life, really nice people. And since they rely on being actually at the events and conducting interviews, or talking to a variety of people, recording footages, and since the matches aren't happening, they lost their one source of gathering the footage or the content they need to make their content. And I see a lot of people trying to make content in this amidst the time of crisis we have. One example I can think of is Ashley King, who runs, I don't know if she runs it, she runs the Horizon.net, and she is an interviewer in the LCK, freelancer, worked with ESPN numerous times for World's coverage, etc., etc. I see her take, the initiative to conduct online interviews with NALCS players during when the LCK was down, and I think that's a brilliant approach. And she's trying to make the best of the situation and try to make content, and she's actually doing it in NA time too. That means she's basically flipping her sleeping schedule or not even getting sleep at all. And I think that's very commendable, because she's trying to adjust in the time of need, or not the time of need, in the time of crisis, and still trying to, make content. Now here's where things get interesting. We are at a time where nothing is happening, and some people, especially freelancers, are feeling it. But at the same time, I think right now is the best time for anyone who wants to get into esports in terms of making content, becoming a writer, making video content. I'm not sure how far you can do for interviews, but in general, making content, I think right now is the best time to either prep for making content in the future or to actually think of content like right now. And here's why. Major events are on hold right now, and they will resume within a week. LCK being the first to come back. I think LPL has already resumed back to their schedule by playing online. And I think NALCS and EULCS, or LEC, will also resume their schedule. And Overwatch League will also conduct their matches online, and I would expect the Call of Duty League will follow suit as well, along with any other leagues, the CSGO, and also for other esports such as Rainbow Six and Rocket League. And I know for a fact that a lot of people over the world right now are at home because they're either been told by their government to stay at home, or their workplace has, told them to stay home amidst so they can contain the virus. And I, for one, appreciate anyone who is working, and please be kind as they have to deal with bullshit such as hoarders. Now going back to the content. With all the leagues on hold, there are also new things that are happening. Call of Duty League is relatively new. I think they played a couple of weeks, just played a couple of cup matches, but that is still relatively new. That launched early this year, I think. A new league for CSGO started, Flashpoint, that is spearheaded by Duncan Thorne-Shield, Christopher Monte Cristo Michaels, and getting help from, I think, other big team owners such as Envy. And Riot Games' new game Valorant is also in the horizon, apparently supposed to launch in summer 2020. So you have existing esports games and circuits, and you have all these new ones popping up. So you have a lot of areas where a new content creator can make content for. And especially since the matches aren't happening, this is like a perfect time to actually start prepping. Maybe like a timeline, or think of content or topics that you may want to cover. And once the league resumes and new things are come out, you're ready to make the content. And I'm saying this because this is basically what I've been doing for the past week-ish. And since I got my new computer set up, got my work set up, and since I'm working from home, I'd have to travel 2 hours for commute. I have actually the time to make content, which is great. Now, if you're the first time listener, thank you for listening. If you're an existing listener or anyone, you might be thinking who are you to give advice where you have little Twitter followers and or haven't made content consistently yourself? You are absolutely right. But at the same time, I think it is a unanimous opinion or thought amongst the community that esports content has been more the same throughout. It's always the main heads doing podcasts. It's always mini document series here and there. It's either match highlights. There hasn't been much new content to speak of. And I think this is very different compared to when I started making esports content back in 3 or 4 years ago. When I started content, I literally did it because I was in Japan for an internship and I was super bored. And I thought to myself, okay, I have all this free time literally because I can't go anywhere because I don't speak the language. What can I do in this time? And at the time, League of Legends esports was really big and was some more popular ones next to CSGO. So I was like, you know what? Why don't I actually start making content? And since I didn't have the necessary equipment to video edit per se, I resorted to writing. And the first thing I wrote about the favorite players. I liked at the time. And the players that interested me the most at the time was any Korean players that came over from Korea, basically, because that's when the big Korean exodus happened, where people flocked to China or NA. Even to this day, in my short-ass writing career, the most popular thing I wrote was about Lusboy when he first became a player for TSM. And I even had the like the one-time glory of being in the front page of League Reddit because I wrote about, well, I think it's because of what I wrote about TSM. That's how I made the front page. But at the same time, the analysis of like how, well, the topic of the TSM article was basically comes down to why Lusboy is like the best Korean import in terms of not his playing level. I mean, he was really good too, but it was more like analyzing his ability and his effort to learn learn English, that made him stand out from other people. And that's why I wrote about why that's attributing to his success in TSM. So I wrote about that, and I wrote about more like human interest stories. Because when you write about things in esports, I think there's two paths you can go down to. And this also kind of relates to any media content, even like video or podcast. Or podcast is different because then in podcast you can come up with your own topic that doesn't have to be analysis. It can be like, current events and all that. But the two roads I think you can take in esports content creation is you either go for analysis or you go for memes or things like that. Analysis can, range from like analyzing matches, analyzing players, analyzing teams. You can bring previous tournament winnings. If you're talking about a specific player, you talk about how he came to be, his individual performances. You talk about the meta and how he performed in it and all that stuff. And the human interest aspect where, example of me talking about Lusboy's effort to learn English for him to adapt to the TSM, team ecosystem better. That also falls down to kind of analysis because that's analyzing what the player is or doing, to stand out from the rest. So there's a lot of things you can write about. For example, if you want to write more analytical pieces, I mean, teams are already signing players for Valorant? I don't know. And they're recruiting really prodigies in the scene, or they're recruiting, CSGO players. I know T1, the Korean juggernaut in terms of esports, are already signing big name young players to prepare for the inevitable Valorant League. And you can write about that, like you can write about like who the player is, like why would SKT1 sign him, and like what kind of role he would play. Now the research that would come down here would be you got to speculate what kind of game Valorant will be in the future, and you got to kind of analyze what the player brings to the table, and you kind of got to match like what does this player bring to the table that will be effective in Valorant. Again, we don't know much about Valorant, but that's where the fun comes in. You can kind of speculate because of the fact we actually don't know anything about the game outside of the few gameplay videos from the alpha and like the footage we got from influencers and pros playing on site at the Riot headquarters. Like, we can speculate how much we want because who's gonna tell you that you're wrong, right? And like, speculations are also a great source of the topic you can write about. And that's why fantasy leagues and like betting are so popular amongst esports, because you can, even if you are, let's say you have all the stats about two teams going at it, for example, each game will start out as 0-0. You don't know how it's end up. You can guess how likely it will end up, but you can never correctly guess the end score 100% of the time. Another area you can write about is, or make content for, is if you're more of the spectacle type, you can make hype trailers, you can make meme videos, you can make highlights. Personally, I hate, you know what, I hate them. Like, the most viewed esports videos are not even like esports, but like video game related videos are all like highlights from streamers. Those are the one that get the most views. Now, depending on the esport you want to cover, that's kind of hard, because if the players actually don't stream outside of the actual games, it's kind of hard to make highlights from. And there are thousands and thousands of YouTubers already making this kind of content, so that's kind of like super saturated. So my recommendation would be, if you are actually want to get into like making content for esports, you have to, well, not have to, but it'll be better if you start writing stuff, or start writing, video essays about the topic you want to talk about. Because highlights, you can grab from, anyone can grab highlights and edit them. The only limiting factor is that the market is saturated, and you have to be first, or you have to like already built up a good amount of subscribers to your YouTube channel to actually get effective views. But your opinion is your own, and that is original. And the fact that it's original, it might actually entice some people who might agree with you or might disagree with you, and that creates discourse. And that discourse can go viral, and that viral means you get views and clicks. As some of you might know, I actually worked at an esports media agency, or not media agency, a media company per se. And I was the lead video editor, and one of my tasks was I actually had to come up with different video ideas to make. Basically, I was brought in to improve current video styles. Basically, they were making highlights at the time, so I had to, kind of experiment and brainstorm, how can we make highlights more engaging than what we already have right now. And that goes from like thumbnails and whatnot. To be fair, in that aspect, highlights, I think the best thing you need to have is the eye to catch correct plays and the correct highlights. You can put as much effect as you want for intros and outros. I find that most people don't care, as long as you grab the right plays. But making highlight content also falls victim to the market is super saturated. And in the case of Overwatch, if you make highlights on your own channel, Blizzard will crack down on you, because they want to keep highlights to themselves, because they want to, kind of control the monopoly on the highlight views. So let's go back. I said two roads you can take are analysis and spectacle. And this is from my experience with action, because the two types of videos that usually got a lot of views and guaranteed at least 100k views were analysis videos and the meme videos I spearheaded, called Actionpedia. I actually lucked out. Well, let's talk about the analysis one first. The most sought after content on YouTube that gets the most views, well, not the most views, but that gets a lot of views, if you analyze a player that is, so one example of an analysis piece is when Pine from the NYXL was being covered heavily by the Overwatch League, so he was getting a lot of features, and his plays were on highlights all the time. They even gave him the name Big Boss, so they played him a lot on stage and on the broadcast. And we, at the time, Action had a segment called Behind the Action, where we took a play and we analyzed the hell out of it, and we put a lot of production values in that, like over the top map, specific highlighting around the team, player and objects and all that fun stuff. We had a really good player at the time, so actually he knew what he was talking about. So the content we made for that got a lot of views, like easily 500k, from like 50k subs we had. So that one took off because everyone was talking about it amongst the community. Like Pine was the hot shit. Like he was the hot topic of at the time. And if you actually know what you're talking about in analysis, and if you write about that, you will get a lot of views. But the hardship of analysis is that you actually have to back up your statements. If you analyze a play and you say X player did this because of this, and if your statement isn't proven by what you see on the screen, and you show any supporting evidence, like in a bad term, you're basically pulling, opinions out of your ass, and that's basically the same as being a Twitter analyst online, where they say, "Oh, this X player is good because he does this," and you say, "Well, what's the proof?" And if they don't have any proof, because only because he does this and this and that. Analysis is super hard because you actually have to have the game knowledge and or the game sense and or the eye for kind of like get in the player's head, like why is that player doing this at the time. A player being a good flick shooter, you can easily recognize. But proper pathing and why a player moved and did this a certain action at the time, that takes an eye and can only be achieved if you actually play the game a lot, I find. Now there's a lot, there's jokes around that certain analysts are, in League of Legends were plat and lower, and they're making these like analysis pieces. But those haters are actually wrong because some of these analysts who are plat are now, coaches and actual analysts for big teams. Yes, you need experience of the game to make proper analysis and find useful things from, footages and VODs. But I think you can develop that without being super good at the game. If you watched a lot of games, again, you can still develop a sense for the game. You can develop the eye for noticing certain things that normal people might not notice when they view the game. You just need time to actually practice that. That would be like me, who haven't watched CSGO in like forever, and I barely play the game. I only have played it casually, writing and like analysis piece of a CSGO. I would never do that because I don't know what's actually happening within the game. I don't know the game deep enough to actually support my claims that I would have, I guess, about a match. Much rather, I would have rather focus on the human interest side, because those are things that, I can form an opinion on and actually back up my claims by researching, previous accomplishments and or footages that the players are in, and actually get the evidence to do. But actual game analysis is not my forte, and I know that, and I won't even try. But if you feel that you watch the games a lot and you actually know how the game operates in a competitive setting, then you might want to go try write analysis pieces or make analysis videos. If you're new, then you should try every area that you can. But at the same time, you should also, play to your strength. And that's why I went the human interest route, because the player aspect interested me more than the actual plays themselves. Like for the longest time, I was interested in Korean players coming to NA and the hardships they went through in terms of adapting to the NA culture, because I went through the same shit. I was a Korean resident before I moved to Canada when I was at a young age, and I barely spoke English at the time. And basically my actual experiences of going through what the pro players went through gave me a revenue to ask, okay, like I kind of get what they're going through, and if I research a bit more, I can kind of guess or write content where I can actually tell people who never went through such like upbringing or like this big shift in their lives, and tell them how hard it is for these players to like go through, because they might not actually understand what the players go through, because some people might just think, oh, they're just got a boatload of money and they're just here to play games, so like why aren't they performing so well? Now that's the analysis side as far as I can think. You either be good at the game or have the eye for the game to actually come up with intelligent analysis, then you should write about it. But remember to back up your thoughts or get horribly bashed by the community, who are super unforgiving when it comes to, high level match analysis. But if you can get it done, or actually putting yourself out there, good analysts are in a great need right now, because a lot of teams need analysts to pull the data and or find the information they need, so the coaches can use them to prepare better, training, or like preparing for different matchups against different teams and all that. So that's one way you can get your feet wet in esports. Start writing and start analyzing. Now the next one is a bit more tricky because it plays on a sense of humor. And being funny is one of the hardest things you can do in life. You're either funny by nature or you work your way up to be funny. And there's different kinds of funny too. There's like haha funny, and there's also like sarcastic funny, or people who get laughter from like, back then, like South Park humor, like toilet humor. I don't want to say this, but like racist humor. Like back in the day, I was like making fun of Asians was a big thing for comedians, but I'm glad we're kind of toning that down. But yeah, being funny. So being funny includes, comedic pieces, videos, or meme videos. Now, when I say meme videos, it doesn't necessarily have to mean like, popular culture memes. It can be little bits here and there that makes the video more entertaining. So basically has a more playful tone than a, very serious, hardcore and analytical video or piece. Let's take example the thing I gave birth to, the Actionpedias, which to this day is still a weird name. So at the time, we were making a lot of video analytical content and making hype videos. While those are getting views, I thought, I was tasked with like, can you come up with like anything else we can make content for? And coming off of a 2D animating job in a university where I made, kind of like low quality stick figures, kind of animate, I thought, well, why don't I try animating things? Why don't I create animations to help explain things? And the first idea that I came up with was like, okay, Action Esports, we focused a lot of the Overwatch League content, because at the time, Overwatch League was the next big thing in esports. So we primarily focused on that. And there's a lot of terms in the Overwatch League that gets used in the game. Basically like Overwatch League lingos. So at the time, C9 was used a lot because the whole, the team not being on the point and they lose because of that. So I thought, okay, a lot of the hardcore people know what C9 means if they follow the scene or other games. But like all these like normies or the people who just got into watching esports through Overwatch might not know what that means. So why don't I make explanation videos with playful animations to explain that? Because explaining a term like C9 in like a serious tone, like I don't think I would watch that either. And that's like, why don't I just look up in an Urban Dictionary or something to learn it? Like if you want to make meme videos or things like that, they need to be entertaining. You actually need to write a script and actually create a flow which makes people to keep watching your videos. People keep watching analytical videos to the end because you're trying to basically prove a point, and you basically, it's a video essay, a really short video essay from your thesis point, your body, and ending paragraph. But in terms of entertainment, there's no thesis or anything. Well, there's still like a point to the videos, but you still need to actually create a flow, but it's different than the analytical videos. While you're still trying to convey your point to the audience, you still need to make it, you throw like jokes here and there. So in my approach, I was like, okay, how do I make this more interesting? So I thought, okay, we're going with 2D images. We're going with original like 2D vector art. We're going to take all these like cute arts from the Overwatch League, and we're going to try to sneak in jokes here and there. And that's how I like use like GTA death sounds. I actually had to handcraft the payload that goes on Route 66. I like made that from scratch, and a lot of people appreciated that. And basically I had to fit in as much as humor as possible into the video, but it was still my sense of humor, which I really liked. Now in that video I didn't expect to do well because it wasn't an analytical piece, and it wasn't really like a highlight video, which we were known for at the time. So I didn't expect much. Maybe I expected like, okay, if I'm lucky, it'll maybe get like 10,000 views or not. So within a week, that thing jumped to 100,000 views, and it climbed to, I think, 800,000 a couple of years even after. And I'm not sure if it is now, but it is the #1 video that comes up if you search what is C9. And personally, I take that that's like a personal accomplishment for me, because like that was the original content I pitched. I made it and published it, and it actually got recognized by a lot of people in the community. Unfortunately for me, the Overwatch community decided to split its Reddit forums into the general Overwatch, where they only uploaded highlights at the time, and the competitive Overwatch League, who actually viewed these things. So I don't know, I could have gotten more views, but what are you gonna do? And that's why Overwatch League is not as big as it could have been. But that's another story. To wrap up, the reason I'm recording this is because I want to see more content creators making things for esports, because I think we are getting a point where things are very stale. I like seeing the content that is being made by established content creators. I think they're great. But I think at the same time that's preventing any new people from jumping in, because they know it's hard to get that starting point, like your jump off point to get into the esports scene. I am not big in any sense of the word, and the biggest recognition I have is that I'm being followed by Thorin on Twitter. That's about it. But I still make content because even though I'm burnt out of esports, I still love esports. And if you have the passion to if you have passion about esports, like legit passion, and not just like, oh look, it's a new hypest thing, then I think actually trying to make content, it will be worth your time. It might be hard, it might be long hours of making content and not being recognized, but you have to start somewhere. I started out from a bloody site that paid writers based on the views they got. And all the people I know who started out from that site are either now, coaches for teams, even head coaches, and or have worked for ESPN and other big news outlets. Pick a road to go for. You either go for analysis or spectacles if you can't think of a focus that you can kind of strive for in esports. Each road will have their hardships. Now, whenever I have a hard time making content or kind of get lazy, I always think to myself, because I took the first step, I had the opportunity to actually go places. I actually had, got a job at an esports company. I actually had an opportunity to actually go see Overwatch League live in person. I actually had the opportunity to actually make content for Overwatch League team and actually see how a team operates, and actually get to know the players, and even meet people on Twitter who are like the biggest names in esports. You just got to take that first step. And I'm still grinding away, recording these podcasts and planning things that it might not get made or it might not get noticed, but eventually someone will run into them, and if even one person reads it, then that is good enough for me. And who knows, maybe I will get lucky and get recognized by more people. And seeing people recognize your work or have a big influencer in the scene kind of like retweet your work, there are no other bigger satisfaction than that. If you're a new content creator, kind of makes the entire effort worth it. And hopefully I can take my own message to heart and actually start making content. And that does it for this edition of the Gaming Blues Podcast, Esports Edition. God, that's a mouthful. Thank you for listening. You can find this podcast on almost every podcast platform you can think of. Majority ones including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play. Thank you for listening, viewers. I'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.